All right, so after you've chosen your case, we're going to start looking at motherboards. A moderator of the Server Builds Discord and forum named Riggy was kind enough to put a spreadsheet together very similar to the CPU compendium or the CPU spreadsheet. And what the spreadsheet has is, I wouldn't say all, but I mean, it's very close. So a lot of 2011 socket motherboards, and it's mostly Supermicro tie-in and the enterprise versions. You can find that spreadsheet right here, right at the top of the motherboard section. So all credit for that goes to him. He's done amazing work there. So please check that out. I will show you that shortly. Something to note with motherboards as you're going to pick a motherboard, you want to make sure that it supports V1 and V2 CPUs if that's important to you. And I think it should be. V1 and V1s are great. You can get really good value V1s, but as prices start to drop, you'll probably want to start looking at V2s. They're slightly more power efficient. You have way more options. You have the ability to go up to 12 cores instead of just 10. There's a lot of different V2 CPUs that don't really have a V1 counterpart. So, in my opinion, just plan for the future. If you're not sure, just find a board that supports V2. And I would say most of the motherboards do support that, unless otherwise stated. But you can avoid all of that by when you just find a board you want. If it doesn't say, just send a message to the seller and say, "Hey, does this support V2 CPUs?" And they'll either tell you yes or no. And if they don't know, just move on to another listing. Don't even mess around with it. You can actually look sometimes. Let's take a look at the X9 DRD here. All right. So we'll just pick up one of these. Yeah. It varies with every board, but there is, I believe, a revision number either here or down here, and that's what you want to look for. And it's not the same for every board. 1.02 might support V2, 1.1 might support V2, 1.2 might support V2. I think generally speaking, 1.0 does not, but it varies board to board, and you can actually look at Supermicro's site, see what revisions support what. It's To me, it's very important. So I would take a look at that, and please note that it's a hardware revision. So no amount of updating the BIOS uh, will enable V2 support on a non V2 hardware revision motherboard. So you need both. You need the hardware revision to be correct or higher, and then you also need the BIOS version to be correct. It's probably a good idea to buy a cheap $5 V1 CPU. I've linked one here. Just in case, you only need one CPU to flash the motherboard. So, say you're sure the board supports it, it's got the right hardware revision. You want to make sure that the BIOS can support it. And the only way to do that is to buy a V1 CPU just in case. It's $5. Just do it. So, go ahead and pick up one of those, and then just in case you need to flash it. That's really the biggest thing you have to watch for with these. So in this section, I've covered dual socket motherboards, and if you click on the brand here, that will take you to Supermicro's information about the board. If you click on the model, that will take you to either an eBay search or an Amazon link where you can find the board. Here's the board's form factor. Socket mounting, this determines what type of CPU coolers you can use on that. And that will be in the next section or the section after. Should be down a couple. How many DIMM slots it has, how many PCI Express slots it has. It doesn't, I'm not specifying what kind of PCI Express. You're going to have to do your own research on that. I mean, you can look in here and it'll say 6 X8 PCIe 3.0. So there's 6 there. How many onboard network controllers it has, if it has onboard SAS. And then just another note, you know, see like see need revision 1.2 for V2 processor, for example. And then the expected price. Again, this is going to vary, so I'm not putting how much they cost because they come and go very quickly. So this is all of the dual socket boards that I would recommend and take a look at. They're all Supermicro. Single CPU boards, again, Supermicro, same columns and descriptions there. X79, I would probably expect that most of you won't go X79 unless you're going to do like a workstation or you want to do something very focused on building like a game server where you can get very high clock speeds. You can start overclocking. They're actually pretty good for gaming too. Both Hey Danny and I have X79 home theater PCs with an E5 1650 V2 that we've overclocked to. I don't know what he's overclocked his to, but I know that I've gotten mine over 4.5 gigahertz on all cores, and that's a 6-core, 12 thread. So this is back before even, let's say the 8700K came out with its 6-core, 12 threads. Obviously, the IPC, the instructions per clock, aren't as high, but the performance is still pretty dang good. So I've been happy with that, and I like my X79 build. So there's some X79 options here just for you to take a look at. I know they're not going to be as popular, but keep in mind they do require different RAM, and all of that's specified here. So that pretty much sums up the motherboard section. I think I've covered everything that I want to talk about here as far as those. Real quick, just to end, I do want to take a look at Riggy's sheet, and you can see how in-depth it is in comparison to the motherboards I have listed actually in the guide. So you can click any of these for the eBay link to these boards. He has them separated by brand, so here's all the Supermicro at the top. Gigabyte, Intel, Inventec, Tyan, and he has columns for form factor, ILM config, that's for the CPU cooling. How many DIMM slots, max memory, whether it's LRDIMM, RDIMM, or UDIMM. That does change your max memory capacity. NICs, and not just how many, but type. So like onboard 10 gig or 1 gig, things like that. Well, actually, he has 10 gig E, and some are just regular 10 gig. But I mean, this thing is very, very well fleshed out. So take a look at this sheet. It might be a little over some of your heads, and that's okay. I don't mean that to belittle you, but it's probably more information than you need, honestly. Oh, and the last thing I want to talk about with the motherboards, if there's two similar motherboards, let's take the X9 DRH ITF and the X9 DRH 7F. Now, these two right here are nearly identical. The difference is that this one has onboard 10 gig Ethernet, and this one has onboard LSI SAS. LSI SAS is very, very cheap to add. 10 gig Ethernet is, generally speaking, I wouldn't say very expensive. It is somewhat expensive to add after. So I mean, between the two, you're looking at a $25 difference, where if you swap these around and say you want to add 10 gig to this, you're looking at maybe $75 for the same 10 gig that's built into the board. In my opinion, the onboard 10 gig is almost always the correct way to go. unless for some reason you must have the onboard SAS. I don't know what that would be. Maybe you're using it in like a 1U or a 2U where you can't fit a SAS card and you have to have it on board. I don't know. But I would almost always go for the 10 gig version if it's available, and then add LSI SAS in afterwards. That pretty much sums up all I have to say about motherboards. I will see you in the next section.